Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this Battle Bluetongue webinar. I'm Mandy Nevel, Head of Animal Health and Welfare at AHDB, and I'm delighted to be joined by Gareth Hateley, Hannah Lloyd, and a video recording from Fiona Lovett as part of this webinar this evening. To begin with, I'd just like to alert you to the fact that this is being recorded, and a recording will be circulated to all the participants who've registered within 24 hours. We're going to have an overview of the Battle Bluetongue vaccination campaign and the resources that are available for you to use, as well as the current update on Bluetongue. We will have plenty of opportunity for questions at the end. If you have questions on clarity or points of correctness going through, do put your hand up or pop a question in the question box, but we will take most of the questions at the end of the webinar. At the end, you'll be asked to fill in a feedback, and that would be really helpful if you could fill that feedback form in and let us know if there are any topics that you'd like to be covered in future webinars. And do keep an eye out on the Ruminant Health and Welfare and AHDB webinars, AHDB websites for details of those webinars. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the team at AHDB. So we've got Yana, Anna and Zoe who are behind the scenes making sure this webinar goes smoothly. And also thank you very much to the speakers this evening for presenting. To begin with, we're going to hear from Gareth Hateley, who is a BCBA board member and also a member of the BVA Scottish branch member and well known to many people in the cattle industry. I'm sure he doesn't need too much of an introduction. So I'm going to hand over to Gareth, who's going to give us an update on the current Bluetongue situation in the country. Thanks, Gareth.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. Firstly, apologies if I have to turn the microphone off and start coughing. I'll try not to blast you out. So my brief presentation really is about to give you a technical update as to what the situation is currently with Bluetongue in the UK. So we'll start with that, but firstly, a couple of reminders. The first is that Bluetongue is a notifiable disease, and that if disease is suspected, it should be reported to APHA. It's an impactful disease. It has impact on animals, both in terms of morbidity, mortality, production, and that's including fertility. And a big aspect of this is also the impact on trade, and that's within the country and between countries. So it is an impactful disease, and that's why why it's notifiable and why we've got the measures in place that we have in terms of restriction zones. Signs, I would like to point you towards the many resources that are available both on gov.uk and on the Ruminant Health and Welfare Bluetongue sites, and there's one for general users and there's a vet specific one. And I'd encourage you to, if you have you want to learn more about the clinical signs of Bluetongue in general, I would point you towards those. But briefly, just a reminder, it's an orbivirus. It's also an arbovirus. In other words, it's spread by an insect vector. That insect is the members of the Culicoides family, midges. They are the main means of spread from not from animal to animal, but midge to animal. One midge bite will almost guarantee infection of an animal. The other way around, the midge getting infected from the animal is much less efficient, which is in contradistinction to other diseases like Schmallenberg, where both are very efficient, and that's why Schmallenberg has in the past looked almost like an infectious disease when it's affected whole herds. That's not the case with Bluetongue, although with the myriad numbers of midges around, that mitigates against that. So at the moment, we are in what's known as the seasonal vector low period, and that is the period in temperate countries at which the temperature is too low for the what we call the extrinsic part of the cycle. In other words, that's the bit in the midge to be completed. So anything below around 12 to 15 degrees C, the midge is unable to transmit the virus, and so generally there is no new active infection of midges. However, there will be midges around that can survive in microclimates around farms, and they can survive for a couple of months, and these are probably the main reason why there is overwintering of Bluetongue, and why we continue to get infections during the seasonal vector low period. The only I will touch on a couple of clinical signs because these are relatively new, and the information is relatively new. So I'll update you on those particular ones. But firstly, I'll give you the numbers. So to date, and that's in the last couple of days, there have been nearly 500 investigations of suspicion of Bluetongue. 221 of those have been confirmed, and of those 221, these are all Bluetongue 3, two of which have been in Wales and have been cleared up by tracing reporting. But there's also been one of Bluetongue 12, and this is a new one, new in the sense of new to Northern Europe, and a reminder that there are 29 different serotypes of Bluetongue. The vast majority of those, there's no, in effect, cross protection. So in effect, you're dealing with 29 different diseases with different impacts. BTV12 has been isolated on one farm, and that's relevant in terms of the restriction zone, which I'll talk a bit more about at the moment. But in terms of that particular farm, it could be significant because if you happen to get co-infection of two viruses, two serotypes of Bluetongue in the same animal at the same time, there is the possibility of reassortment occurring. And given that Bluetongue has what we call a segmental genome of about 10 fragments, there's the possibility of significant changes occurring within the nature of the virus. So that's something to watch. There's no evidence yet that there's been co-infection in the same animal, but we've certainly had two serotypes, of Bluetongue on the same farm in Kent. The area that I wanted to alert you to particularly is the evidence of calves being affected neurologically. And to date, I can show you this information, which has come from Vanessa Swinson, who's the veterinary lead of the cattle expert group at APHA, who's been doing further investigations on all these farms. We've confirmed Bluetongue in calves that are newborn, that so 7 animals on 6 in 6 herds that have shown signs of dummy calves, stargazing, recumbency, inability to suck, and these animals have been congenitally infected with Bluetongue. And the reason why they're showing these signs is because they've been infected at the time of neurogenesis, which is towards the end of the first trimester and the beginning of the second. So it's almost the middle of the 9-month pregnancy of a cow. So that's when those animals, when those calves, dams will have been infected. All these herds are near the coast, and I would draw your attention to, if you want to look at where either the zone, there's a map for that on gov.uk. Also, there's a map that shows the locations of confirmed Bluetongue cases, and you'll see that those tend to be within the restriction zone, which is pink. That they tend to be more clustered towards the coast, in either East Yorkshire or Norfolk, Lincolnshire, and then round the south coast. And the reason for that is because these reflect the incursions of midges that have been blown across the North Sea. And to be aware that midges, even though they're tiny, can fly over flat water, sea, in other words, for some considerable distance, up to 250 kilometers in 24 hours. They're much less readily able to move over land. It's a few kilometers a day at most. So these calves have been born to herds at a particular time in gestation, and the lesions that are being seen at post-mortem have been of hydranencephaly. So that means that the majority of the cerebral hemispheres are replaced by fluid with a thin line of cerebral tissue around the surface, or in some severe cases, absence altogether. There've been other signs of cerebellar hyperplasia, and on these farms have also been associated in other cases, other clinical signs. So there's poor fertility, and that's about 0 to 20%. Early embryonic death around the same sort of frequency on herds. Abortion 0 to 6%. Stillbirth 0 to 2%. And then one or two odd unusual signs like a red nose and two calves with cataracts. So these animals have comprised about 2 to 17%. That's 17% of animals in a herd. So it's not insignificant, the impact that this is having. And at this point, I'll just pause and say, I think it's important that as vets, that if we are seeing these signs, that I would encourage you to report to AFA, partly because they are notifiable, and it's our common duty to do that, but also because APHA are looking at differential diagnoses for these conditions. So things like Schmallenberg would be very much in the frame, particularly in the north and west. And there are other differential diagnoses that we really want to get a handle on what else might be looking like Bluetongue. Again, I should also stress that thus far, no signs have been seen like this in sheep. That may just reflect the time of year and the season that we're in, vis-a-vis lambing. But again, the same answer will be, if you're suspicious of any signs like this, please report to AFA. There will be a letter in the veterinary record in the next week or so about this, and to encourage investigation. So I'd suggest that you look at the vet record when it comes out. So in 2025, one of the things that's going to happen is that the seasonal vector load period will end. We don't know when that'll be. It's usually mid-March towards April. As temperatures rise and midge activity increases, some of these midges will be blown back from the continent again, but we may have overwintering in our own midges, so it's likely that disease will start earlier. Overwintering can occur either in the midges I've said, in midges already infected. There is a potential for vertical transmission through from cow to calf, and some of these calves that are born will be viremic, and so there is a risk of them spreading disease. So that's another potential. Also, germplasm. So that's why there are big restrictions on germplasm, and indeed we are aware that the BTV8 outbreak in France in 2008 there was a recrudescence in 2015, which looks to be from stored frozen semen that may well have initiated that outbreak. So that's again one to be aware of. So how we manage this disease going forward will be important, because one of the options that we have with Bluetongue control zones is we can what's called snap them out. In other words, increase their size. And one potential route to do this is to include the whole of England. There's no decisions have been made on that. The reason why I mention that is that you'll immediately understand that if that happens, there's then free movements of animals. So it doesn't. There are no trade restrictions within the zone, but it does mean that the animals can move anywhere within that zone with impunity, and so the disease will go with them. And that's why I mentioned BTV12, because although that's only on one farm as far as we know, the potential could be for that disease, that serotype to spread as well. So there are consequences of snapping out. However, we do have one control measure that I haven't mentioned yet, and which is the whole point about this webinar, which is vaccination. There are 3 vaccines that have been released for use under emergency authorization by DEFRA for use in England. And I can let you know now that Wales has agreed to use for the use of vaccine from the 1st of March, so that's this coming Monday. Scotland and I think Northern Ireland are holding judgment on whether vaccine should be used. I think there's aspirations to remain disease-free, but that depends on what happens to the zone size. And I would encourage you all to consider vaccination wherever you are in the country, partly because of this potential for the zone size increase, but also because this disease can be unpredictable and it can spread faster than we might think. So I would encourage you not to be complacent, to ensure that you're fully informed, and the Battle Bluetongue campaign information that you'll hear from Hannah and others is an excellent resource to start with. So I'm going to stop there now, other than just to say that the principles that we've got here is we have got 3 vaccines that are effective. The principle being used is that the decision to vaccinate is one to be taken between the farmer and the farm vet. And there are a number of tools that you'll hear about that will help facilitate that process on a farm by farm basis. But I think my last parting words at this point would be to say that these vaccines are effective, and I would encourage you to consider using them with your clients. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gareth. We'll move on to Hannah Lloyd, and I'm delighted to welcome Hannah this evening. Hannah is a director at Pinstone, and Pinstone are a specialist PR and marketing agency in the farming arena. And we've been working with Hannah and her colleagues well over the last year on Bluetongue, and before that on the ruminant health and welfare. And Hannah's going to talk to us about the Bluetongue campaign, what's available in terms of resources, and what the ambition of the campaign is. So I'll hand over to you, Hannah. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mandy, and thank you, Gareth. Hi, everyone. So yes, background sort of to where we are today, really, in the ambitions of the Battle Bluetongue campaign. As Mandy alluded to, sort of my role from a comms point of view, supporting ruminant health and welfare and working closely with AHDB. on the Bluetongue piece has been going since October 2023, when obviously there was a huge upsurge in cases in the Netherlands, and we knew that was something we needed to be really mindful of for the UK. So since then, we've been working across the industry, across the devolved nations, to ensure that the industry is as ready as we can be, that we're creating information, creating communication support as it becomes available, as we can answer questions. So as part of that, we've got a working group from a comms point of view, specifically focusing on Bluetongue 3, and we meet weekly and bi-weekly depending on the risk levels. So this has been a huge sort of cross-industry piece to get to this point really today, where we're now launching a vaccine campaign to you across the industry. So by way of a bit of background to that, obviously with learnings from previous outbreaks and sort of learnings from the experts and vets, etc., we know the key role vaccine, as Gareth alluded to, plays in managing diseases and obviously trying to curb spread. So there's been a big demand from the industry for a Bluetongue campaign on vaccination, and we're now at a point where we're really pleased to be announcing this and launching it out to you. And we, again, totally understand the importance of that conversation and the trust that farmers place in you as their vets and the industry. So that's why we're here today talking to you first, to give you all this material, give you this campaign, to then obviously be able to go forward and talk to your farmers. So that is very much the setup for this. As Gareth also alluded to, obviously we now have vaccine availability under authorisation across England and Wales. So that does again sort of increase the importance that this is the devolved piece, not just for one country. So in terms of what we're going to cover through today is very much talking about what's available, what's the ambition for this campaign, how we can support you, and then ultimately sort of how you can use this information with your farmers. So ultimately the ambition for this campaign that was set out up front is very much to, obviously from a vet's point of view, to give you the tools and give you the materials you need to assess the Bluetongue risk with your farmers. We know it's a complex conversation that's needed. It's not a simple decision to take. So there is some tools I'm going to talk you through that will help you undertake that assessment, essentially to understand the risk impact of Bluetongue for that particular farm and their situation and their stock. And then from a farmer point of view, the sort of ambition we really want to get to with them is that they are thinking that they need to consider vaccinating their stock after undertaking that assessment, so they know they're vaccinating the right stock at the right time, etc. Obviously, the context of the campaign being termed Battle Bluetongue is not done unknowingly. We know this is not a silver bullet. We know this is a long-term battle on our hands. This disease has already been sort of plaguing us, if you like, since October 2023, and we foresee, obviously, it continuing to. So we know this is a long-term battle, and there is that context of actually we need to take that battle on with Bluetongue. There is also an undercurrent of thinking about understanding risk assessment and risk management in general with vaccination. So hopefully some of these tools will be useful in that context for you. So in terms of sort of the behaviours we're trying to support you to initiate with farmers, and obviously you'll know your clients best, and there'll be different cohorts, etc. We understand that, but ultimately for farmers it is about getting them to think, I want to talk to my vet about Bluetongue in that first instance, and we want to make sure you're obviously forewarned, forearmed, got all the resources and knowledge and tools at your fingertips to have those conversations. We do want farmers to feel like there is something they can do, that they can battle Bluetongue, because we appreciate, obviously for those in restriction zones last year, etc., there have been people that have been really facing difficult challenges on their hands, on their farms already. So knowing that there is something they can do for us is really important. We want them to know that this going through an assessment and understanding the risk to them and their farm and their stock for Bluetongue is important. It will give them advice, as I say, to act on. So for us, that is hopefully going to be something where they can see some light at the end of the tunnel, if you like. Then ultimately, obviously, the action we want to initiate is to get people to consider they can vaccinate against Bluetongue. It will defend their farm and their stock. So key messages, and you'll see this on the materials. It's across obviously the presentation that you're seeing now, but it's across all the materials that are being prepared and available for you. It is that three-prong: assess your risk, protect your business, defend your stock. Obviously that's written to speak to farmers, in that this is a outward-facing campaign, but obviously there's a real undercurrent there of how you can work with your farmers and how this is supporting you to have those conversations to assess the risk on their farms and go through that decision maker tool together. It is about protecting businesses. We understand the challenge. Obviously, we've had a lot of feedback through the survey we ran in the autumn around the challenges of being under restrictions. We know that. So it is about understanding those risks and how can vaccination help? Where does that play a role? And then ultimately that defence piece of how can you defend actually and keep Bluetongue out by stopping the spread and vaccinating the right animals. So one of the key resources that's been brought together through a working group of expert vets is a vaccine decision maker tool. I'm not going to take you through it line by line or anything like that. I'm sure some of you will have heard about it and seen it. It's all going to be available through everything that we share with you. But ultimately, that is a really good conversation starter, literally a working document that you can take your farmers through and work through to understand their risks at different points depending on their farm setup, their proximity, stock, different ages, different times of years, etc. Multitude of factors that need considering. And by working through that, that really is the foundation of that assessing your risk from a farmer's point of view. And that is something that is obviously best done working with their vet because you're able to provide them that expert advice they need on this. So that is hopefully something that can prove a really good conversation start. And we really want to initiate farmers to want to come to you, and you would obviously suggest coming to them to encourage that conversation to happen. So the wider campaign, we'll share the link on this as well, and there's a QR code there, but there's a wealth of resources available here, ultimately giving you, as the industry and as a vet practices, a toolkit to communicate out. Ultimately, there's a pack to be able to host and run a farm meeting, everything from a full PowerPoint template with slides with everything you should need to run a presentation on Bluetongue, to FAQs, answering those difficult questions. Obviously, the vaccine decision maker tool I've talked about, social media posts and graphics that you can be putting out and communicating to your farmers about this. There's even posters that you can print out for your practices, waiting rooms, put out through newsletters, etc. There's newsletter copy, so if you wanted to put out a written piece about this, there's leaflets, there's email signatures, you name it, we've tried to think about it. But if there is something that you're missing, do reach out to us through the Ruminant Health and Welfare email address and the website, because we are working with the industry to develop more tools. I know the vet working group are still looking at how they can provide other resources in future to help those conversations and help people assess the risks. So this is very much the start, and as I say, there's a lot of information here to give you everything you need to be able to go out and communicate and encourage your farmers to think about this. But if you need other things in other formats, or you feel there's something missing, do let us know, because that's something we can consider. So part of the toolkit that we brought together, that's all available for you to freely access and download. As I say, it has been, from a creative point of view, brought together by AHDB and Ruminant Health and Welfare, but with full industry-wide input. Part of that was giving you everything you need to run a farmer meeting. And I know we've got Fiona Lovett recorded to take you through some tips in a minute, but essentially this is sort of, as a concept, been road tested in that we've got what you might need to promote a farmer meeting through your social, the FAQs you might need for any questions that come up, and then the PowerPoint and everything you might need to present. So hopefully it's a really good starting point to have those conversations. And I know Fiona spoke at a meeting run by Joe Henry and his practice, and that was a really well received, constructive meeting with a decent group of farmers. So hopefully a good starting point. So as we've sort of talked about, there's obviously plenty of information available. We're here today obviously specifically talking about Battle Bluetongue and the campaign that's been brought together for BTV3, but there is a whole wealth of information on the Bluetongue Hub. There's obviously the government websites that hold a lot of up-to-date information and all the recent cases. But yeah, if you have any queries, there's always people at the end of the email as well that we can reach out to, but do also speak to your organisations that you feed into, because most of them will have all been involved in this in some shape or form. So there is a wealth of information there available, and there will be more information coming in due course as well. But yeah, hopefully that's a useful starter of what was available, how to use it and things like that. But I'm happy to take questions at the end if there's anything specific around communications. As everyone's aware, obviously, if you have farmers that are sort of finding this difficult to deal with, there is obviously a lot of support out there as well in the industry to signpost. So this is all on the website as well, if that's ever helpful. I'm sure you're all familiar with all these types of organisations, but yeah, they are available for a good cause. Here you can just see the key expert groups that have been involved directly in bringing this together, but there's a lot of individual vets and experts as well that have been involved. So yeah, huge thanks to everyone. Fab. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Very comprehensive overview of all the resources, and we really do encourage people to use them, share them widely, and plagiarise as freely as you like with those, because they are developed for you to use for your own practices and for your own clients. So do that. Can I just remind people that there is a question box on the webinar? If you've got any questions for Gareth or Hannah, or for me, anything in general, please do pop them in the question box. Anything we can't answer, we'll either take away and come back and answer directly to the person proposing that question, or we'll put them in our FAQs, which you can find on the Ruminant Health and Welfare and AHDB websites. We're now going to hear a pre-recorded message recording from Fiona Lovett from Flock Health around delivering effective farmer meetings. She's going to give us some insights into how to deliver a successful meeting. So, Gareth, I've seen you come back on the screen. Is there something that you want to answer now?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that that the vaccine situation is quite fast moving at the moment, and one of the things that we've got that we didn't have in 2008 was such a good, effective hub of information. So please use this hub. There's where the Ruminant Health and Welfare Hub. There's a lot of information there. The vaccines are currently under emergency authorization, but there could well be a move towards preliminary marketing authorities, and so the hub is the best place to keep yourself informed about these changes, and these changes will happen, in the months to come. So it was just to reiterate, use that and be aware of the fact that this is a fast changing situation. Thanks.
Thanks very much. So, Anna, can we go to the beginning of Fiona's presentation, please? And I'll hand over to Fiona.
Hello, I'm Fiona Lovett, and I'm going to tell you about running meetings for farmers about Bluetongue. Except I can't move my slides on at the moment. Okie doke. So back in early January, I think, I went up to Black Sheep Farm Health, and we ran a meeting for approximately 60 farmers in Northumberland to tell them about Bluetongue. I'll be perfectly honest with you, I was really nervous about this meeting. I do a lot of farmers meetings. The reason I was nervous is because none of us know what's going to happen with Bluetongue. We don't have all the answers. And I like to stand in front of people and look as if I know what I'm talking about. And I had to say to these farmers, I'm just here to tell you what I think we know about this. But every farmer in the room is going to have to make their own decision about what they do re Bluetongue, whether they want to vaccinate, what they want to do, how they decide for their own farm. And that's how we presented it to the farmers. We're not experts, we're telling you what we know. And I was blown away by the response of those farmers. At the end of the meeting, people came up to me and said, "Oh, thank you so much for coming and telling us about us. We don't know as much about Bluetongue as we'd like to." And actually, on the back of that meeting, that practice has already sold 17,000 doses of vaccine. Now, I was not telling those farmers to vaccinate. All I was doing was telling them what I know about the disease and letting them make their own decision. And it's a different decision for every farm, depending on the value of their stock, depending on their level of risk. People take out different levels of insurance because of the different characters. And I think we can only go and be honest with people about what we know. And what do we know about Bluetongue? Well, this is what England looked at. Actually, this is out of date now, I'm afraid. It's changed. But as of January, there'd been 190 cases, I think we're 200 now, of BTV3 in England, a couple in Wales that were imported. And this is what the restriction zone looked like in England. But still, a number of people, especially members of the general public, it's not a thing. No one's heard of it. In contrast, this was a situation in the Netherlands in 2024. They had 10,000 affected farms. The red dots are positive for BTV3. The blue dots are clinically positive BTV3 farms, and the little green dots are BTV12. They've had a handful of cases of BTV12. But BTV3, Bluetongue serotype 3, is known as being incredibly aggressive. So there were 55,000 dead sheep due to Bluetongue 3 in the Netherlands in 2023. And in 2024, it was higher. There were 65,000 dead sheep. That's over and above the number of dead sheep normally. So last year, their national flock reduced by 20% due to BTV3. That's pretty serious. I just want to take you back to virtually this time last year, 2024, April 2024, and this is a situation. So this is the UK. We had at the end of 2023, we'd had a couple of cases on the southeast coast, Norfolk and Kent. We already seen the map of the Netherlands. Netherlands were very much affected. There were a couple of cases in Belgium and a couple of cases in Germany. Pretty much, I would have said by looking at this map a year ago, Germany and Belgium pretty much similar to us. Then looked what happened in 2024. This is now a picture of Germany. As you saw before, this Netherlands here, very heavily affected. A couple of cases in July 2024. By August, 1 month later, a few more cases, a lot more cases. By September 2024, absolutely loads of cases. Each red dot is an infected farm. So they went from 86 reported cases to 1,419 to well over 7,600 reported cases, farms affected. Now, if you go back to that slide I had before, at this stage, a year ago, Germany looked much the same as we did, and yet, I beg your pardon, I've gone the wrong way, and yet that's what happened in Germany. There's no reason why that may not happen in the UK. Nobody knew how bad Bluetongue was in the UK, and everyone said, oh, it's not a thing here, it's very insignificant. So we launched a survey with colleague Rachel Tarnington at University of Nottingham, launched by the industry to say to farmers, we want to know, if you're suffering, we want to know what's happened, and we need good up-to-date information. So we tried to make it, we're not the government, are we? Obviously, Bluetongue is a reportable disease. It's notifiable. You must let the government know if the DEFRA know if you're suspecting Bluetongue. But this survey was, either way, please let us know how your farm has been affected. And out of that, we got 244 responses. Only 20 of those were case farms. These were the pictures, the coloured pictures of where the case farms were. The red map, this is where all the responses came from. So we pretty much got responses from pretty much across England and Wales. The case farms were where there were cases. And it pretty much correlates with, this is a map of actual cases in the UK in 2024. And out of those 20 case farms, so I've only got data from 20 farms, which I know is pathetic. We know that we've had 200 reported farms, but this is the details we have. The 12 beef herds ranging from 15 to 1,700 head of beef cattle, 15 sheep flocks, of which the range from 12 animals to 7,500. Massive representing the industry. We didn't have any dairy herds respond to us, And what we could see from those very, very small numbers, I admit, pretty low morbidity and mortality numbers in beef cattle, worse in sheep, more sheep affected, more sheep in a flock affected, and mortality potentially higher. But once a sheep is affected, very high case fatality. So if an animal does get Bluetongue, if a sheep gets Bluetongue, a high chance that that animal will not survive. We now know that there are actually further implications in the beef farms, which we didn't pick up in this survey. You know, we know people have had quite significant lack of fertility, either as their cows have been scanned, they've not been in calf, or they haven't, their pregnancy has been affected quite dramatically on some farms. But certainly in the face of disease, you don't notice it much in cattle, you definitely notice it in sheep. What else was the survey telling us? We asked people what their intentions to vaccinate were, and people last year were, well, maybe only a quarter of people were most likely to want to vaccinate. And at that sort of levels, we know that will not make any impact on the spread of disease. So if the situation happens like it did in Germany when they got the disease early in July, potentially we have a map that looks similar to Germany this coming summer. What the survey did show us is the impact of disease on farms that didn't have actual cases was massive. The restrictions really affected people. They lost their sales. They couldn't sell what they usually did. And anybody who lives down in the southeast knows how throttling those restriction zones were, how it really affected people's normal commercial practices. Events were cancelled and it cost them. It really hurt those farmers because of restriction zones. It is worth just pointing out that if you look at the map, so this map here shows a density of sheep in the UK, much higher density in Wales and in the north of England. And this is cattle, the blue one is cattle in the UK. All our cases last year were in very, very low density livestock areas. And the restriction zones were there for a very good reason. I know it was really painful for these farmers in the southeast, but I'm also incredibly grateful to them, because by putting up with those restriction zones, that will have confined the disease and will have protected our high livestock dense areas. Next year, we will have Bluetongue as soon as the weather warms up, almost without a shadow of doubt. And it may well be that restriction zones aren't sufficient, but that just explains why they're there. And also it's just a way of saying thank you to those guys who put up with that, because it has protected the rest of us. It certainly did last year. Anyway, so we've made this vaccination decision tool, made it alongside vets from all the main veterinary associations, BCVA, sheep vets, goat vets, BVA, the British Veterinary Association. We put this together, and what we'd like farmers and vets to do is work through this together, because every farm has to make their own decision, and farmers are encouraged to think of their own specific battle plan. And so the decision maker tool, it works so if you have more answers in the red yes column, then much more reasons for you to vaccinate. More in the yellow column, then less likely. So an obvious one is what is the value of your flock or herd? If you have high value breeding animals, rare breeds, pedigree animals, valuable rams or tups, it's almost a no-brainer to vaccinate, particularly in sheep. We know that the effect on an animal who gets Bluetongue, it is highly likely to lose that animal, even if you manage, or you're along with vets manage to get those animals through the acute stage of disease. I'm afraid what we often find is they then slough off their hooves a couple of weeks later, so and end up being put to sleep anyway. So if you've got high value animals, definitely vaccinate. It makes a difference where you are in the UK. It makes a difference if you're in a risk area last year, if you've definitely got Bluetongue, or if you think you're much further north or west. You've got a bit more time. You may not have much time, but you have got more time than people right in the south east. And then the question go through with a number of the density of ruminants in the area. We bear in mind it's midgie spread, but if there are more infected ruminants, cattle and sheep, then there's more infected midgies in the area. Do you plan to move any animals back from the southeast? That's very significant. And the general topography of your farm, that makes a difference. Do you have places that are potentially low midge area? Either you can house them with ventilation and midge-proof netting, which is really not practical in a lot of places, but that's would be important. Or you've got exposed ridges, which are less risk for the exposed ridges, which is less risk for the midges. And then the other important things to discuss, vets and farmers, is how it fits in with your normal farming year. What stage of pregnancy the female's in? I wouldn't be vaccinating at the point of breeding. I would be much more worried about active Bluetongue virus affecting fertility than I would be about the vaccine. The evidence shows the virus really definitely affects fertility. The vaccine, there is no evidence to show the vaccines affect fertility, but it's sensible not to vaccinate at the point of breeding if you can avoid it. And you don't want to be vaccinating at the point they're about to give birth. I personally would vaccinate my high value animals. I'd vaccinate my breeding males because I have fewer of those. And I personally would vaccinate as many of my cattle and sheep as I could afford to do so. We have such strong evidence that vaccinated flocks or herds have lower mortality than unvaccinated ones from the continent. But everybody has to make their own decision about what to do. And I think I will probably leave it there. There's a lot of information on that. And then we've also done tables which compare the vaccines that are available. There's different dosage regimes, there's different costs, and that's something for farmers and vets to discuss together. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Fiona Lovett for pre-recording that because she unfortunately couldn't join us this evening. One of the last slides that Fiona put up there was the comparator table between the vaccines, and just as Gareth had said before, a reminder that the licenses and the requirements and the conditions that those vaccines are licensed for will change over the coming weeks and months likely, and so that table is now slightly dated, and we will circulate a number of links with the email after this webinar. You'll get that within 24 hours, and one of those will be to the EMA website, so you can keep an eye on the changes there. Could I ask Gareth and Hannah to come back on the screen, and we've got time for some questions. The first one, Gareth, is going to be aimed at you, and it's really around the vaccine. We've had a couple of questions in about vaccine availability. We know that there have been vaccine shortages in the livestock areas over the last year or so. How confident are we that the vaccine is still going to be available? And maybe you could just talk a little bit about how we're talking to the suppliers and making sure that there is vaccine available.
Yeah, thanks. We've as an industry, we've been in very close contact with the three manufacturers, and they have been assuring us that there's going to be a steady supply of vaccine. We are aware of at least 700,000 doses currently available. One of the requirements of vaccination is that both vets and farmers record, firstly prescription on the vet side, secondly administration on the farm side. This is a requirement of the license, so please encourage your clients to make sure that they do comply. This enables us to keep tabs with the numbers. The uptake so far is around the 50,000 mark, so there's plenty of slack in the system at the moment. So I hope that's sort of it will illustrate that there's a lot to do. But at the moment, there's no issues with vaccine supply. Thanks.
Thanks, Gareth. I think it's important to note that vaccine development is incredibly costly. It's very expensive, and we've worked closely with those vaccine companies and generated a lot of goodwill with them for the benefit of the industry. And I would just like to thank those companies up front for the work that they've been doing. I think it's also an opportune moment, Gareth, to talk about the fact that the vaccines are authorised for use and under licence, and part of that licence is around requiring vets and livestock keepers to record and to report to DEFRA promptly the numbers and the animals that are vaccinated. I don't know if you wanted to say any more on that.
I think that's probably enough on that. But as I mentioned, that it's quite fast moving, and one of the areas that is changing is that perhaps I should just explain that the reason why the manufacturers were able to produce vaccine so swiftly is because these are largely based on technology that is developed through the BTV8, and all these companies have got experience with BTV8 vaccine. So we're looking at a similar platform, and so inferences can be drawn about aspects of quality, safety, and efficacy. That provides reassurance to the regulators that the BTV3 vaccines are going to be behaving in a similar sort of way. So the vaccine manufacturers have used the same platform to develop these vaccines. They've also developed, are in the process of developing, further developing what's called the dossier, which is the package of information that they're required to provide for each step of authorization. And they are currently developing as much information as they can through the standard testing protocols that they have to follow in order to determine things like safety in breeding animals, duration of immunity, things like that. So there's information that will likely come in due course that's not available now. But it's just to provide some reassurance that they're not just completely new vaccines. These are established on existing platforms.
Thanks, Gareth. I don't think we can say too much about the costs because there's obviously market pressures involved there. But do you know, we have been asked a couple of times, what's the cost involved in the vaccine? I don't know if you can answer that one, Gareth.
I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
Yeah, no, I think that's a difficult one. And then around vaccinating ewes, what's the likelihood of protection being conferred to the lambs? And do the lambs then not need to be vaccinated?
So the answer there would be that there will be some immunity transferred to the lambs, and I'd encourage you to look at the data sheet for each individual product, because there will be guidance as to when animals can be vaccinated. Because remember, these are killed vaccines. They're all killed vaccines. So there will be the impact of maternally derived antibody on those lambs. So there will be a period before which it's not advisable to vaccinate lambs when the dams have been vaccinated. So the advice is follow the data sheet.
Thanks. And I guess the same's true for kind of vaccinating at the same time as other vaccines, just to follow the data sheets.
Yeah, yes, indeed. And I think one of the things that Fiona said was that you can tie your vaccination of Bluetongue in with your wider vaccine program. So many farms will have their own health and welfare plan, and in that I don't need to teach you to suck eggs. You all know this, but it gives you, there's time to be able to time when you do the vaccination along with other management procedures. So I would encourage you to build that into the health and the farm health and welfare plan in discussion with the farm.
Thanks, Gareth. And I think a lot of these are coming your way, Gareth, I'm afraid. So the next question is about transporting animals in and out of restriction zones to things like shows. And if those animals are vaccinated, will they still be subject to test? And if they have been vaccinated, is that likely to impact the test? Will they be positive on the test?
Yeah. So on that, at the moment, the restrictions are different because we're in the seasonal vector low period. They will change again once that ends, and the risk of disease transmission, significant disease transmission through midges recurs. One of the issues that we've got with vaccination at the moment is that we don't have some of the key information, one of which I've already mentioned, which is the duration of immunity, which are required to allow vaccination to be a determinant of animal movements per se. So testing will still be needed, and the use of tests like the PCR won't be compromised by the use of the vaccine. So there will be a testing regime that will be advised, and vaccination won't impact on that. So there should be no disincentive to use vaccine if animals need to be moved to shows. But there will ultimately there will be licenses for these movements if those animals are living within a restriction zone and want to go to a show elsewhere. That will be explained as the restriction, as the vector low period comes to an end. That will be made clear by advice on the government website.
Thanks, Gareth.
I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. We've had a couple of questions around Bluetongue 12. I know we have now identified Bluetongue 12 in England, but there is no vaccine available for that. Is there any cross protection from the Bluetongue 3 vaccine? And if not, is there any chance of a Bluetongue 12 vaccine being developed?
Yeah, no, a really good question. So the first part is that there's no cross immunity. So vaccines are serotype specific. And because they're killed vaccines, there's usually a maximum of 2 serotypes in any one vaccine. So you'll see different manufacturers in different parts of Europe producing vaccines for 1 and 4, 2 and 8, things like that. In terms of the BTV12, there's not a lot of experience of BTV12 within Europe at the moment. The outbreak in the Netherlands, which is where we assume that the one in Kent came from, it's been blown across the channel, is fairly small scale relative to BTV3, and in terms of the number of farms affected. And the information we're getting from Dutch colleagues is that the impact seems to be less than BTV3. The only caveat I would give to that is that these serotypes can behave differently in different countries. So I wouldn't want people to think that just because it's not had impact in the Netherlands that it might not have impact or more impact in the UK. But the indications thus far are that it's less impactful. In terms of a vaccine, I think that will be because this is a market decision by vaccine manufacturers, and I think it'll be driven by what the demand for vaccine will be. So I think I can't answer the question any further as to whether there will be a vaccine or not. I think it'll depend on what happens elsewhere in Europe and also what our experience is. So I'm sorry, it's a slightly lame answer.
Thanks, Gareth. I think we're going to have to wrap this up. I've just got one last question, Gareth, on Bluetongue in goats, and what signs do they show? Do we have any guidance on what we should be looking for in goats?
Yeah, so the I think the first thing to say is talk to the Goat Veterinary Society. There is some advice available through them. The signs in goats are broadly similar to those in sheep, and I think in terms of impact, there's been less in terms of clinical signs that we've seen. I think there's been more experience in Holland because they have dairy goats. And so it's sort of I think it would say I'd say similar signs to sheep in terms of impact, but probably slightly more towards the cattle experience. So sitting between the two.
Thank you. And I'm aware that there are a couple of questions that have been unanswered, but we will try and answer those in the FAQs that we keep updated and uploaded. But there are a couple of comments and suggestions about using different dosing regimens for different animals and in different situations. And my understanding is that we should only recommend what is licensed for use, Gareth. And I don't know if you want to say anything there.
Yeah, so I would agree with that absolutely. Is stick to the data sheet. The only comment in addition to that would be to point colleagues who are, if they're dealing with camelids, is that there is some advice that the British Veterinary Camelid Society has produced that will that's more to do with suggested dosing intervals, vaccination intervals. So I'd point you to the links on, again. I think those are on the RHW website. Yeah, Hannah's nodding. Yeah.
There is a specific section on goats as well, dated September last year, advice from the Goat Veterinary Society on that vet only page. So we'll put that link around as well.
Super, thank you very much. Well, we're a minute past 6. I'm going to draw this webinar to a close. I would like to thank Gareth, Hannah and Fiona for their presentations. I'd like to thank everybody for joining tonight, and I would like to thank the team at AHDB behind the scenes who've been facilitating this. Please do fill in the feedback form. If you've got any further questions, please do let us have them. If you have any topics that you'd like covered in future webinars, please do put that in the feedback form or get in touch with us. Just to say, please keep a lookout for Bluetongue, report early, work with your clients to work out about the vaccine. Please promote the message around the Battle Bluetongue campaign, and let's hope that Bluetongue doesn't cause us as many problems as we fear it might do in 2025. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.